Hello guys, and welcome to the Old Ultra Runner channel. I'm your host Jay Tynert. Today I want to tell an old running story about my first completed marathon. My first marathon that I completed was the 1993 New York City Marathon. Earlier that year I had attempted a marathon. I was signed up for the Dallas Trails Marathon, which was a fairly new marathon at the time. It was to be held in March of 1993. I don't remember if it was its first or second year. They did hold it for several more years, but it never got as popular as the White Rock Marathon. But I was signed up for it. I was targeting it. I had hanging out with the Hash House Harriers that did a lot of 3 to 8 mile runs, just following wherever a flower trail went, and then drinking a lot of beer. But there was a group of them that ran marathons, and the idea became a lot more normalized to me. So I decided I was going to train for a marathon. So the Dallas Trails was in March. I was aiming for it. So in February of 1993, I decided I was going to run the first 20 miles of the Cowtown Marathon in Fort Worth. It wasn't my water, 8 stations, and continuing on for a full 20-mile race. Had never done more than a half marathon. I don't even know if I'd done a half marathon at that point in a race setting. So I went to the Cowtown Marathon. I was running pretty well. I got past mile 13, which had porta potties, and a little bit past that I started having to go to the bathroom real bad. Serious, needing to go to the bathroom. I was reduced to a walk. I didn't want to turn around and go back on the course to go back to the porta potty, so I continued on, but there was nowhere to go. So finally I ended up going up into someone's yard, going beside their house, and I went to the bathroom. And it was cold enough, I had little cotton gloves. I sacrificed one of those and threw it in their garbage. I still feel kind of bad about leaving a mess in their yard, but there was really not much I could do at that point. Anyway, that kind of upset me quite a bit. I slowed down some after that, but then got going again. I got to mile 20. I was a little under 3 hours, so I probably could have still finished the marathon in under 4 hours. I had friends there. The 20-mile mark is where the Hash House Harriers used to have a aid station. It was a beer stop. We would hand out beer to the runners coming through. The Hash House Harriers did that at the Cowtown Marathon, and we did it at the Dallas White Rock Marathon. But anyway, I just decided to stop with my friends. It wasn't my goal marathon. My goal was a few weeks later, and I had just planned 20, so I quit. And all my friends were like, "You're crazy. You're so close, and you're so close to finishing your first marathon." I'm like, "That's okay. My goal was a few weeks later." So I stopped and I hung out with my friends and was done for the day. A few 3 or 4 days later, I went for my first little run after the Cowtown 20 miler, and I made it about 3 or 4 miles, and I had the injury thing flare up where I think I've told the story before. I had a tear in the tendon in my ankle, and it caused inflammation to the sheath around it, and I continually was getting injured through the 90s and most of the 2000 years, real often after long runs. Anyway, that flared up. I was in pain, not sure about my marathon that was only a week and a half away, so I just did not run at all anymore up until the Dallas Trails Marathon a few weeks later. I started the Dallas Trails Marathon. It did start hurting me about 3 miles in. I continued running to about 8 and decided that this wasn't going to work. I was dropping out. I still had to walk about 3 more miles before I was able to drop out. So I covered 11 miles of the course and did not finish. So looking back on it, I probably should have finished the Cowtown Marathon when I could have. So anyway, we fast forward to the fall of 1993, and some friends and I had entered the lottery for the New York City Marathon. Some of us had gotten in. So I was training in the summer and in the early fall, I guess through September. I have another video about one of my big challenge runs with my friend Sean where we were trying to run fast loops around the lake. Well, that was in that fall of 1993 when I ran the fast loop around the lake. I also remember I had a little more speed back in those days, even though I did get injured quite often. And I did a 20-mile run, I remember, in like 2 hours and 20 minutes. I've done nothing like that since. But again, the ankle stuff started flaring. Anyway, the ankle stuff started flaring up in late September, so I pretty well took off most of the month of October. I just ran a few times. And then the New York City Marathon was the first or second week in November of 1993. The week prior, the White Rock Half was happening. So I entered the White Rock Half. I decided I didn't want to run it real hard because I didn't want to wear myself out for New York City. So I ran it what I thought was an easy pace at the time. But I did it in 1 hour and 38 minutes, which is my PR for the half marathon to this day. And that day I could have run it a good bit faster. I was trying to hold back to leave something for the New York City Marathon the following week. The following week we flew out to New York. I went with, I guess there were 6 of us total. 4 of us were running the marathon. 2 were friends that also traveled with us. We stayed in a hotel in Manhattan. We were trying to keep things cheap, so we flew one of the cheap discount airlines. We got there and we were staying in a hotel in downtown Manhattan. It was an older hotel. I think we were only really registered to have 2 guests, but there were 6 of us, so we just walked in 2 at a time. And I guess 2 people got to bed and 4 of us slept on the floor. I just slept on the floor the night before the marathon and the night after the marathon. We got there the Saturday before the race was on Sunday. Went down to the expo, walked around the expo quite a bit, and I know we walked down into Manhattan to get dinner. We walked to the Central Park. We saw the finish line. We saw Mark Platchis, who had won the World Marathon Championship earlier that year. He was running for the U.S., but he was originally from South Africa, but he had U.S. citizenship at that point and had run for the U.S. and won the Marathon World Championship. So we kind of, I guess, were down walking around at Times Square even kind of late the night before, which was not real smart. We did a lot of walking the day prior between the expo and things. But anyway, we showed up marathon morning. You went into downtown Manhattan. We caught a bus that took us out across the Verrazano Bridge and out where the start is. And we sat there for we were there for a couple hours, I guess, before the start. I was very fortunate in that I got to start right in a group that was right at the front. There were 3 waves. There were two different groups up on the top part of the bridge that were lined up. You had the elites, and then you had like a little bit slower group. And then I started just off the bridge, but we ran on the lower part of the bridge on one side. The other side of the lower part, they kept for cars, so they could at least have emergency vehicles getting back and forth across the bridge. So, but I was able to start toward the front of a group that went across the bottom bridge. And we took off, and I will always remember that because you could see off to the left, out in the harbor, you could see the Statue of Liberty, you could see World Trade Centers over there, the World Trade Center towers, you could see the Empire State Building. They shot off cannons, water cannons, and we took off. And you're going across the bridge, and the bridge was shaking. It was quite a memory. It took, because there were like 3 different groups started at slightly different places on the bridge. It took about 8 miles before you were over the bridge in 1.5 miles, but you ran on a little bit different streets. And it took until about mile 8 before everyone merged up to continue on the race. I was feeling pretty good, though. I had had some major sinus problems back in those days, and I used to take Sudafed, which is notorious for drying you out. I knew that was a problem, and I was trying to drink a ton the day before, but it was still drying me out. And it turned out that in 1993, it was the hottest New York City they had had on record to that date. It got into the low 70s and was like 90% humidity. So that, along with the fact that I was probably dehydrated from taking all the Sudafed, I did end up having some dehydration and cramp problems a little later on. But it was still great. I got to run through the 5 different boroughs of the city. You got to see different communities. I remember going by the Hasidic Jew community at around mile 9, and I noticed my throat was really dry. I knew I was kind of in trouble already. So I was just stopping at every aid station and drinking as much water as I could. I got to the mid, and I was at an hour and 42 minutes, so like 324 pace. It did not stay that way. Just after that halfway point, we were going over a big bridge. I can't remember which bridge it was now, but it was one of the major bridges you go over in that marathon. And I started cramping as we're going over the bridge. I remember stopping on the bridge and trying to stretch out, trying to get going. But even at halfway, I started having to walk some. I was cramping in my quads, my hamstrings, my calves, even in my abdomen some. I mean, I was in bad shape. So the whole rest of the race, it was kind of I'd run a while, I'd walk a while. I remember walking 1 mile and saying, oh, at this pace, I'm going to finish in 7 hours, because it was like a 20-something minute mile. But I was able to kind of, just like I do in races some now, I was able to keep moving somewhat. You run when you can, walk when you couldn't. And in this case, it was run until you cramped and then walk until you weren't cramping. But finished the marathon in 4 hours and 37 minutes. We finished, and then I remember there were a line of buses that all your bags were in. I had to walk down the length of like 20 buses to get in my bag. So that took a while. And then we were probably 8 blocks away in Manhattan where we were staying, so I had to walk back to the hotel. Actually, the walking was probably all good for me. I remember that night, I don't remember what we did. We were pretty tired. I think we still went out and got something to eat. I don't really remember where. The following day, we were supposed to fly at like 4 or 5 in the afternoon, and we had lined up a ride to the airport. But we got up first thing in the morning, we jumped on subway, and we were going all over New York as much as we could. We went to Grand Central Station, we went out to Wall Street, we went to the World Trade Center towers that were still there back in 1993. We got to the ride to the top of one of them and got to the observation deck and were able to look out. We had been interested in going to the Empire State Building, but it was windy enough that day they had closed down the observation deck of the Empire State Building. But anyway, it was great fun. We got to see a fair amount of the city, got to stop and get a hot dog from a hot dog vendor, which was cool because I'd always heard about it, but had never experienced that. Got back to the plane, and again, it was that discount airline. They had no space for our luggage, so even though we were all just carrying one little bag, we had to put them underneath. They only had one working bathroom on the jet going back to Dallas, so there were often pretty good lines to get a bathroom on that flight home. And I remember we had a couple people traveling with us that were very nervous about flying, and they were like, I want a drink. So we get there, and the first time when a flight attendant comes back, we said we wanted to order drinks, and they said, well, we're out of beer. All we have are these 9 little bitty bottles of alcohol, and they were a variety of things. There was a tequila and a rum, and I don't know a vodka, but there were 9 little bottles, and we just said, well, we'll take them all. So the 6 of us split the 9 little bottles of alcohol. And anyway, we got home. It was quite an adventure. I enjoyed it. I do have a few things. This is the medal I got from the New York City Marathon. It does say New York City Marathon 1993. I'll show picture of a poster that I got and my race number. I've got a few things left. I did get a little, back then it was like the little cycling cap with the little short bill. I had one of those, but it was cotton. It's disintegrated since then. And I had a cotton t-shirt that said New York City Marathon that I wore for several years, New York City Marathon finisher, I think. But it again has fallen apart in the last 28 years. So I'll take a little bit of video of that. But anyway, that is the story of my first completed marathon, and it was an adventure. And if you enjoyed the story and you'd like to hear more, please like the video, subscribe to my channel. I am posting videos twice a week on Monday morning and Thursday morning, and they will contain more of these stories, hopefully some tips. I'll also have race reports of current races I'm doing now, and probably some training updates. And I'm hoping to get on some of my cool friends, amazing friends that I know, and talk to some of them. Anyway, thank you very much. Bye. Okay guys, so this is a few of the keepsakes I still have left from the New York City Marathon. I got this poster for finishing, and you'll see it says New York City Marathon, November 14th, 1993. You see a skyline of the city, and you'll still see the old World Trade Center towers that were still there back in those days. My wife had made me a little book of some of my keepsakes of the first several marathons I did. So this is from my New York City. It has my race number, New York City. Back in those days, we didn't have online race photos, but they would mail you these little things to try to get you to buy race pictures. And I never bought race pictures, but I have the little bitty pictures attached to these. Probably can't see that, but that's me running with my German Fun Run shirt. Just a cotton tank top that I wore back then. And then we got a little magazine, New York City Marathon. It was kind of an advertising section, but it's what we were given. And I have a little note here that I had leg cramps from mile 13 on, but I finished. So anyway, those are the only keepsakes I still have left. I just thought I'd share them. Bye.